Hosffman Ospino. Dr. Ospino is a professor of theology and religious education at Boston College, where he is also the director of graduate programs in Hispanic ministry. He served as a principal investigator for the National Study of Catholic Parishes with Hispanic Ministry, published in 2014, and the National Survey of Catholic Schools Serving Hispanic Families, published in 2016. He is an officer of the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians of the United States, a member of the Board of Directors of the National Catholic Education Association, and a member of the Central Team coordinating the Fifth National Encuentro of Hispanic Latino Ministry. Please join me to welcome Dr. Ospino.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, thank you very much, Maripaz, and well, thank you everyone for being here, for welcoming me in this Diocese of Reno. Bishop, thank you very much for your presence and for the invitation as well. So, I bet that everybody's excited to be here to talk about Hispanic Catholics, isn't it? Yes. Oh, wonderful, yeah, yes. I only heard a few people say yes. Let me ask the question again. I bet everybody's really excited to be here to talk about Hispanic Catholics. Yes. Amen, isn't it? Well, it's not only about Hispanic Catholics. Not only about Hispanic Catholics. All that I will be sharing with you today about Hispanic Catholicism, about the Fifth National Encuentro of ministry with Hispanic Latino ministry, and a few other things, are not merely about the Latino community, but about the church. We all love the church. We all love our communities. We all love our faith. And it is because of the love of our faith, because of our commitment to evangelization, that we need to have this particular conversation. And I know that nobody's in here, having this conversation kind of out of nowhere. You recently finished a synod, a diocesan synod, and my past and Bishop Calvo, as a matter of fact, gave me homework. They told me, before you come to our diocese, you need to study and memorize that final document that emerged. And I did, I studied it, Now, don't trust my memory, of course, But very interesting, very important. And so we want to see how the Fifth National Encuentro of Hispanic Latino ministry connects to what you are already doing, okay? So we're not going to try to imagine something different. You've already been doing some important work, but in order to engage the Latino community, we need to provide a framework. And what I'm here to do is somehow provide the big picture framework, You are the experts on the Diocese of Reno. You know what's going on here, and you know what's going to happen in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So I'm not going to pontificate or tell you what to do exactly here, because that's not my role, Bishop will guide you in that process with the pastoral leaders and the diocese. Pastors will know what to do in their parishes, but we know that as a community of faith, we do not work alone. We always work as part of the larger community. So there is the national vision that is coming from the USCCB, and this is the push towards engaging in this idea of the Fifth National Encuentro of Hispanic ministry. But it's not also the visions of the USCCB, it's also the vision of the Pope. Pope Francis has sent us as a church of missionary disciples. What does that mean for us in the United States as a culturally diverse society and community and church? What does it mean to be a church of missionary disciples in the Diocese of Reno? That's what we are going to try to unpack today, okay? and they told me that we have from 9 until about 8 p.m., isn't it? So just no. So we're gonna work until 2 p.m. And I just want to encourage you to. I know that sometimes when we come to these meetings and they serve lunch, lunch becomes kind of the excuse to move away. If you have to really go because it is important for you to go, do that. But I would encourage you to stay until the end because it's very important, no? So that's kind of my introduction, a little bit of disclaimers, okay? So we're going to try to understand this framework and get excited about the Fifth National Encuentro. Some of you at this point may be thinking, what in the world is the Fifth Encuentro? Some people don't even understand why are we using this word in Spanish, an encuentro? Why don't we use the word encounter? Why should we use encuentro? And I will share with you some of the history behind this, which is very important. But the first thing we're going to do is I have a question for you. And we're going to do this. Do we have a clicker, Maripaz?
Yes.
And if we do not, that's fine. We can use here. Only if we get this thing to work. Not move. Nice. Great. Here's your question. In groups of 2 or 3, maybe if you want to do it at the table, you've got 2 minutes to answer this important question. Okay? What will Catholicism in the United States look like in 2050? Imagine. How do you imagine? This is only 34 years from today. Some of you may not be around. This is not a threat. This is just life. It's just a little bit of being honest, I mean, life happens, of course. Some of us may not be around. Only God knows when they happen to me. Some of you, as a matter of fact, yes, some of us may be around in 36 years, But this will be, 2050, this will be the church of our children and grandchildren. How do you imagine that? You've got 2 minutes, go ahead. 2 or 3 characteristics that come to your mind, please. let's hear from some of you, just 1 or 2 words, 3 words, briefly. How do you imagine the church? What would be one of those characteristics that struck you when you were in your small group?
Hopefully more open.
Hopefully more open. What do you mean more open, Father?
Open to people, open to situations that right now are closed.
Okay, a more open church, that we are more at ease engaging in certain realities that sometimes today we failed, as a community. Very good. Any other characteristic by 2050? How do you imagine the church? Father?
Young and Hispanic.
Young and Hispanic. Very good. Just look at me, young and Hispanic. Poor church, Okay, go ahead. What else do we imagine? Yes?
Definitely lay-driven.
Definitely lay-driven.
Intentional disciples.
Intentional disciples. It'll be, Pope Benedict had this interesting concept of a church, that it will be perhaps a smaller church, yet driven by people who are passionate about their faith, We'll see. Pope Francis doesn't like much the idea of a smaller church. Pope Francis actually wants a bigger church, to expand more and more, yet he coincides with Pope Benedict, with the idea on a church driven by people who are passionate about their faith. Thank you. Yes?
My name is Yvette. I am part of, or a member of the leadership group of the Fifth National Encuentro. And for me, as a Latina female, mother, I feel that unless we teach our kids in our native language our faith, it will cease to exist.
Very good. That's a fair point. So as a Latina mother, who knows her faith and wants to live her faith, if Latinos do not pass on their faith using the cultural vehicles, the linguistic vehicle, that parents have for them, it is likely that these children will not be Catholic down the road. And I will share a few statistics as to why you're absolutely right, But we'll get into that. Thank you. How else do you imagine the church? Now, ethnically, how do you imagine it? Mostly Hispanic? It'll be mostly Hispanic, but not only Hispanic. What's the fastest growing group in the Catholic Church in the United States? Asians. Yes, Asians. So, if you're struggling with Spanish right now, you have to learn some Chinese, wait. Or some Vietnamese. Or just wait to listen to what is happening in the Middle East. There's going to be a huge influx of Arabic-speaking Catholics in the next 10, 20 years. So start polishing your Arabic, because we are going to have to serve these communities in welcoming them in the United States of America. They are our sisters and brothers who are Catholic as well, Christian and Catholic. Very good. 2 more characteristics of Catholicism in 2050. My goodness. Go ahead.
I think it'll be more of a melting pot.
It'll be more of a melting pot. In what sense?
Hispanic youngsters
Yes.
are learning English more and are
Yes.
merging more into the English-speaking.
Absolutely. That's right. That which we already see glimpses in many parts of the United States, particularly in the Southwest, it'll become the norm. Are Hispanics assimilating into the U.S. culture? Absolutely yes. And they are doing it at a faster level than almost any other group, in the past. I will share a few thoughts on that as well. And one last point. Who wants to venture? Yes, back there. Actually, 2 points since there were 2 hands.
I see us more in 2050 as, instead of a melting pot, a tossed salad.
Okay.
That meaning that people are not willing, we used to be a melting pot. We used to give up our cultures and become one homogenous culture here. I don't see that happening.
Yes.
I see we are going to be dealing with the simple Catholic Church. We're going to be dealing with Hispanic masses, English masses, Filipino masses, Arabic masses. People do not want to give up their cultures that they had when they came here. We see that with Hispanic culture very strongly. And we're learning to accept that and changing the face of our church so that we can.
Amen. You actually summarized much of what I was going to say today. So now we can so maybe we can go out and lunch, that's right, no, I'm kidding. But yes, you're absolutely right. When we look at demographic, sociological, cultural trends in the United States, the framework has changed. Gone are the days, the Ellis Island days. Remember the Ellis Island days? The Ellis Island days were when there was this idea that if you wanted to make it in America, in the United States of America, you had to forego your language, culture, customs, and everything else, even your family, So for instance, we're far removed from Ellis Island here in Reno. But back then, someone came from Italy, his name was Geppetto, So the immigration officer would ask him, "What's your name?" "Geppetto." And the officers would say, "From now on, thou shalt be named Joseph." Yes, that happened. Italian names, German names were anglicized. French names were anglicized. Some last names that we don't recognize today, that are now the natural or the regular English names. As a matter of fact, were names that were originally Italian or German or French. And there was this idea that if you wanted to be in the US, you had to be anglicized, and it was forced. Latinos were prohibited from speaking Spanish in public schools or at work, They were punished for doing that. Being black in the United States was almost a curse. So you could not go to schools, you could not get certain jobs. And literally you had to be a subclass living in a corner or a periphery, as Pope Francis says today, of society. That has changed. Thank God. That has changed. Now, what we are living into a different framework. And the framework is, it is okay to be white. It is okay to be Hispanic. It is okay to be black. It is okay to be Vietnamese. That's the new framework. But what we need to learn within that particular framework is, how do we interact with one another without tearing our heads apart, How do we do this? How do we build a community in which differences do not become a source of tension or division, but where difference and diversity becomes their source of energy for the church in the United States? And I think that what you just said, that's where we are heading. But we need to learn how to do it, Nobody, as a matter of fact, nobody is an expert on this. We all learn how to do it. Bishops have to learn how to do it. Theologians, pastors, lay leaders, we all need to learn how to do this. That's why the U.S. Conference of Bishops has asked every person doing ministry in the United States to undergo a training on intercultural competencies. How many of you in here have gone through a workshop on intercultural competencies? 1, 2, 3, oh my goodness. Okay, homework. And actually the word is Maripaz. Well, Maripaz, when she comes back, please remind her, She and her office, her colleagues, and I would advise Bishop Calvo as well to do this, to offer a series of these workshops that the USCCB proposes, because we all need to do this, When it comes down to cultural diversity, we all need to learn how to do this. We all need to learn. Nobody is an expert. We all are semi-incompetent about these dynamics, The fact that Hosffman is Latino and speaks 2 languages, that doesn't make me an expert. I also need to learn every day. And last point.
It dovetails into what you were saying, that we need to be creative and fluid, flexible about the way we envision church. So not to follow the old models, which is really what you're saying, but to explore new avenues to be able to do the linking.
Thank you for saying that. New ways of doing church. In the last couple of years, I've been involved doing research on Catholic schools in the United States. And I believe that some of you in this room are working with Catholic schools at the diocesan and in school level. And that's exactly one of the big questions that we are addressing. We all settle, we're human beings. We all settle on certain models of doing X or Y. This is how my mother did it. This is how our grandparents did it. This is how Reno has done it forever. You know, when I go to Ohio, everybody tells me, well, this is the Ohio way, you know? When I go to Texas, everybody tells me, this is the Texas way. When I go to Massachusetts, where I live, well, this is how we do it in Massachusetts. I'm pretty sure that some of you may tell me, well, this is how we do it in Reno, isn't it? This is how we have always done it. But the truth is that unless we are willing to imagine new ways of being parish and of being Catholic, we're not negotiating the fundamentals. Same Christ, same church, same scriptures, same truth, same sacraments, all that remains, you know? But what we are negotiating is how to be a church that, for instance, needs to speak 3 languages. How to be a church that, instead of having 5 masses in English, a parish, 5 masses in English, needs to shift to 5 masses in Spanish and only 2 in English. Whoa, that really enters into the politics of our communities, no? For instance, there are dioceses here in the Southwest that have embraced the model that no one works at the diocesan level unless this person speaks at least 2 languages. Well, that really excludes some of us, you know? And that stuff is a bullet, you know, that's a bullet that's hard to bite. Because, what do you mean? We're in America. You speak English, you know? But the truth is that the further south you get to the United States, Catholicism is a de facto bilingual, and in some dioceses, like Orange, California, for instance, is a trilingual community. In Orange, if you don't speak Spanish, English, and Vietnamese, you will not be able to do effective ministry, you know? So, welcome to the new world. That's what we are being called to do, no? And we don't do it because we have to, because the bishop made me. We are doing it because we love the church, because this is what it takes to do evangelization. That's what the Apostle Paul did 2,000 years ago, almost 2,000 years ago. He was Jew to the Jews. He was a Greek to the Greeks. He was a Roman to the Romans. And boy, he was brilliant. He spoke all these languages. He knew all these cultures. And he knew that it was necessary in order to build a new church. Okay, I know that I said only 2 more hands, but there was someone with a hand over there. So what do you want to say? Yes.
I'm just wondering if you're going to address the impact of the acculturation pre-Vatican II, and where there used to literally be a different
Yes.
church on every corner.
Yeah.
And how so the faith in many ways was preserved through the institution of the church in the native language of the people.
Yes.
And also through Catholic education, where now every church is asked to be everything.
You just added 1 more hour to our day. Thank you. That's great. I actually have an entire semester on that particular topic, you know, that I teach to my students. But I want to try to summarize it today, and I will incorporate it. But yes, thank you for bringing that up. Okay, let's move on. One point that I want to make sure is this. Catholicism in the year 2050 in the United States, particularly for you in Reno, is being mapped out today. Okay, it's being mapped out today. And it'll be your legacy. One of the questions that I'm going to ask you at some point at the end of the day is, what's going to be your legacy as Catholics in the Diocese of Reno, 2050? When Catholics, 35, 60, 80 years from now, look back at the year 2016, you know, what are they going to say about us? Reno really did an excellent job, you know, creating communities, building the future, setting the foundations for us to flourish. Or are they going to say, these people in 2016 really messed up, you know? They really missed the point. They missed the point, and now our church is not able to flourish, or we have to start from 0 because back then they didn't do enough. That's pretty much what it comes down to. Today, we are reaping the fruits of what Euro-American Catholics primarily did in the late 1880s and early 1900s. We are flourishing because of these Catholics in the past. Your parents, most likely, for some of you, your grandparents, and they did major sacrifices. I'm going to share a little bit about that. But the question is, for our children, what are we doing? And how are we adapting to the new challenges of today? So let's get into this conversation more. I'm going to be drawing from these two resources. I just want to bring it to your attention. I'll bring some data throughout the day from these two studies. Those are two studies that, as Mary Paz said at the beginning, I had the privilege of being the principal investigator. I designed those two studies, one on Catholic parishes with Hispanic ministry, one on Catholic schools serving Hispanic families. So down the road, they are available online. I'll give you that information later. Now, Catholicism in the United States is not new. You already know that, you know? Catholicism, as a matter of fact, precedes the birth of the United States of America by more than 200 years, no? So even before the country became a country, Catholics already lived in this territory. And the first Catholics who came to the United States came from where? From Spain. So the first Catholics were Hispanic, no? The first Mass that was celebrated in the United States, was celebrated in the US territory, was celebrated in what language? Latin. That's a trick question. Latin, you know? Back then it was no vernacular, it was in Latin, no? So it doesn't matter. But in any case, Latinos, no, Hispanics were the first ones in the US territory that came. And since the beginning, no, Catholics in this country have actually been creative about how to organize themselves from the beginning. The first structure that these Catholics used were missions, you know. So there were missions in the Southwest, in Texas, there were in Arizona, Florida. What were the missions? Missions were pretty much, you build a church, and then everything that surrounds that church becomes the protection of the community, no? So there were classes, people learned how to work, people learned how to read, people were protected. Sometimes they had walls to protect the people, indigenous people primarily, to protect them from vandals or people who want to harm them, who want to enslave them, just name it, you know? So the first model of Catholic community in this country was missions. Missions didn't last too long. Most of the missions were built in the 16th, 17th century. By the middle of the 17th century, most of them had disappeared, okay? Today, we have the buildings. Have you ever been to the missions in San Antonio? You know, you go to California, you go and visit those missions. So all we have is the buildings. Then, later on, and this is going to connect to, what's your name again? Terry. That goes to the question that Terry asked. Okay? So, when the United States of America, it was the United States of America begins formally, towards the end of the 18th century, 1776. So, we get this. In the year 1800, this is 1800, okay? The year 1800, how many Catholics do you think there were in this country, in the small territory of the United States of America? What would be your educated guess? I'm deaf, so you need to speak loud, more louder. What would be your educated guess? There is no wrong answer in this room, so don't worry. I'm not gonna. I teach, but I'm not gonna grade you, so don't worry. What would be? 20,000, a little bit more than that, you know? Historians estimate that about 200,000, there were, give or take, 200,000 Catholics lived in the colonies that became the United States of America. So these people did not have these big churches yet. Why? Because Catholicism was, in most of New England, was outlawed. It was prohibited to be Catholic. You could not, if you were Catholic, you could not vote. You could not run for office. You could not buy land, you know? So that's how it happened. So the year 1800, you know, about 200,000 Catholics, most of them, you know, they worshipped in homes. They worshipped, some of them, you know, rented or borrowed Protestant churches to, as a matter of fact, you know, or spaces, not even churches, spaces, because it wasn't a good dynamic, you know, spaces to celebrate, but it wasn't too public. But then, as the years in the 19th century, you know, after 1800s, there was something, a lot of things happened in Europe. We know that Europe is transitioning from monarchies, from emperors, into the modern states. And there were a lot of wars. There was a lot of conflict, a lot of violence. And when there are wars, conflict, violence, who are the people most affected usually? The poor. The poor. Usually the poor. If there is a war, who are the people who lose everything at first? Jobs, homes, security, access to health care? The poor. So what did, in many of these countries, these people were Catholic. So they heard about this country across the pond, across the Atlantic, and they said, well, America, the new paradise. That's how it was perceived. The new paradise. The place where freedom is possible, where there is land, where there are jobs. Now, if you're poor, hungry, in the middle of a war, and you hear about that place, what would you do? Well, you'll pack and just go around. Well, hello, hello. That's what happened. Millions of immigrants from Europe began to do that. The first large waves, you know, the first large wave was an Irish immigrant, you know, among Catholics. Huge wave, immigrant Catholics. So you had the Irish come, and most of them settled where? In the Northeast, the Midwest. Down the road, there were other waves. The Germans, and then the Italians, and then the Polish, and then you had the Portuguese, and so forth. So you had all these people, most of them, because they came, from Europe, crossing the Atlantic, so they landed on the east coast of this country, and they settled there. So now, you've got all these millions of people. Just to give you a sense of how many people arrived. How many Catholics did we say in the year 1800?
200,000.
200,000. What would be your guess in the year 1900? There were 16 million. 16 million. Wow, 16 million. You know, imagine what would you do from 200,000 to 16 million? Well, this is not it was a problem. So I feel, you know, my heart goes out to the bishops back then, you know. Imagine, bishop, if you had 200,000 people and then 16 million, what would you do, you know? So, what happened was, can you turn it on? It's just only for doesn't make problem. So, these people arrived in the United States. Imagine, the Irish speaking some English, but Gaelic as well. The Italians speaking Italian, although the Italians arrived a little bit later. Germans speaking German. And then all of a sudden, bishops are in their homes trying to figure out what to do in the new world, and somebody knocks on the door. They open the door, and voila, 16 million Catholics. Like, Bishop, here we are. And they were not speaking English. They were speaking all these languages, you know? And remember, these were not the intellectuals or the high class that arrived. These are the rowdy people, you know? These were the poor. These were the people who were fleeing, no education, you know? They just arrived and they just, well, Bishop, what are you going to do with us, you know? We want a church. And Bishop said, well, we got bad news for you, friends. Bad news. What are the bad news? The bad news is I don't have churches. And I don't have priests. So the people go around and they said, later on they come back to their bishops and they said, well, you know what, bishops? When we were packing our coffers and bags and everything, you know, we made sure to pack some priests and nuns as well, you know? So we brought in with us a few priests and a few nuns. So we are ready to celebrate Mass with our own priests. That's to the merit of European Catholics. They came with their own priests. And I want you to understand this, because very soon I'm going to jump into the Hispanic migration, and that's one of the big differences, okay? Latinos do not arrive in the United States with their priests, with their clergy, or with their sisters. Europeans did. So they're ready, and then the bishop said, I'm so glad that you have priests and sisters, but I still don't have churches. So the Irish said, well, you know what, Bishop? We are going to build this church. And that's what they did. These people were dirt poor. These people had no education, thank you. They had no education. But they were explored. They had no jobs. They had to work in the factories, and they had to build the railroads and the roads and the new buildings and new infrastructure. But they said, we are going to build these churches. And they began to do that. So the Irish began to build these churches little by little. And then when the Irish finished their churches, they went to the bishop and said, Bishop, voila, we have a church. Would you come and bless it? And the bishop said, yes. What name do you want to give it? Guess what? St. Patrick's, you know? This is why in the United States there are about 1 million St. Patrick parishes. It's just amazing, you know? Almost every parish built by the Irish is called or St. Columkill or St. Patrick's, you know? You get all these names. Well, you get all that, and the bishop and the Irish Catholics said, well, very good. And the Irish Catholics told the bishop, well, there's only one caveat. The Irish built this church. And guess who the church is going to serve? The Irish. Is that it? And the Germans said, oh, really? Is that what you want? Is that how you want it? You know? Well, the Germans went out and built some of the most beautiful churches. If you have ever been to the Midwest, you will see some of the most beautiful. These are work of art churches, the German churches. So they went out and built a network of German churches. And they also told their bishops, we, the Germans, build these churches. And they are going to serve primarily who? Germans. And then the Polish. And down the road, the Italians. And then you had the Portuguese. And then you had the Armenians. And you had all these people. Welcome to the world of national churches. National churches became oases for these immigrant Catholics. They came and in their parishes, they learned their faith in their languages. Although worship was still in Latin, remember, okay, worship was still in Latin, they were catechized in their native languages. They were served in their native languages. These communities served as spaces where they received social services. They learned English in these communities. They learned they learned job skills in these communities. It was amazing. And these people felt very proud of these communities. Most of them in the Northeast, Midwest, but also throughout the country. You find all these churches. In 150 years, how many Catholic churches did these immigrants build all throughout the United States? What would be your guess? Thousands, yes, it was thousands. about 23,000 parishes. 23,000 parish communities, built, the majority of them, by European immigrants. So it was just great, it was amazing, these communities. Now, not only these people, now notice this, problem, solution, okay? We need churches, we're gonna build churches. Doesn't matter if you're poor, doesn't matter if you speak 10 different languages. We gotta build these churches because that's the only way we're gonna form community in the United States. Now, national parishes were not always, the paradigm of nicety, no? I mean, there were, for instance, you go to some cities in the Northeast, Midwest, where you find in a small town of 20,000 people, you find 15 churches. And the French didn't cross a word with the Irish. And the Irish didn't speak to the Polish didn't speak to the Portuguese, etc., you know? So they were a little bit segregated communities. But on the other hand, national parishes did very well vis-a-vis maintaining the faith of the people. Parishes are important to sustain the faith of the people. That's why we need to take care of the parishes that we have and build more, particularly in the South and the West, where Catholicism is growing. We need to build many more of those. Well, another problem arose in the middle of this conversation. Well, if you're how many of you here are parents or grandparents here? What's the most important treasure that you people have? Your children. Isn't it? Your children, now your grandchildren for some of you. And what do you want for your children? The best. The best. It doesn't matter if you're a rowdy Irish immigrant, you know, or if you are a Jewish intellectual, or if you are a Latino theologian. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You want the best for your children. And the best for your children as a Catholic, what is? You want the best education, and what else do you want? The faith, if you're a practicing Catholic. You want those two things. The best education, and you want the best possibilities for, for this child to be like you. Someone who practices and cares about the faith. Isn't that the case with you and your families? We all do. And so do Hispanics. And so do Black Catholics. And so do Asian Catholics. Everyone. There's no exception here. This is why at the beginning I said that a lot of what I am saying today is not just for Hispanics. It applies to all of us and our future, our shared future. Well, big problem. We don't have schools. Why? Because most of the public school system in the 18th century, 19th century, doesn't exist. The United States of America does not have a public school system. Why? Because children are not to be educated, you know? Children are to grow up in their homes, and when they're ready to work, go to work, and girls, when they are ready, they should go and what? Get married and have babies. That was the mentality. The public school system in the United States begins only barely in the middle of the 19th century. This is very recent, and it begins in the Northeast as well. So, when it begins, well, they needed teachers. They needed teachers. And back then, there were not all these big universities, and everybody today has a degree from a college. Back then, forget it, you know? So, if you needed teachers, okay, let's put on your hats, as now you want to start a school. You know, you're going to organize a society. So now you're going to think. You know, you're part of a think tank. You want teachers who are educated and who can teach the kids the basics and also their faith. Who would you go and choose? Who would you invite to be teaching your schools? Nuns, you know. But there are no nuns yet. There are not as many nuns. We're talking about the U.S. society. The U.S. society is still wrestling with Catholics. Remember that this society begins as a mostly Protestant, society. with a very deep anti-Catholic sentiment. So I'm sorry, but the nuns would be the last group of people you would think about. You know, you don't want nuns. You don't want those Catholics. So who do you want? Who would you go and pursue as your teachers? Ministers, yes, Protestant ministers. Those would be the people who would come. And yes, so they went and they started teaching Protestant ministers. And those people who were educated mostly in the Protestant world. Well, so you got all these people there, and then the anti-Catholic sentiment was deep, and they started to mock the Catholic children. In some schools, they beat the Catholic children. I have 2 children, and if one day one of my children comes home and says, my teacher beat me or slapped me or something, I don't know, I'll lose my hair. I don't have any hair, so I don't know what I will do, you know? Just imagine that if you are a Catholic at that moment, and your children come and say, Mom, Dad, my teachers are making fun of me. That Mom, Dad, I was slapped. I was punished for being Catholic. I was laughed at because I went to the Good Friday celebration. What would you do as a Catholic? Can't say it, please. What would you do? What would you do? You would go to the teacher. But at this moment, you know, Catholics are not highly educated, you know, there are no lawyers, I mean, at least as many lawyers as we have today. What would you do? Who would you go and complain to? Who would you ask help from? Your priest. And the priest would say, don't wait, I don't know what to do here, you know? So let's go back to where we went first, you know? Bishops again, of course, you know? Just go to the bishop. Remember, you can always go to your bishop. I'm kidding. So you go to the bishop, and the bishop opens the door. And then the bishop says, well, people say, well, bishop, our kids are being mocked at school. They are being mistreated. And not only that, they are being Protestantized. You know why? Because in schools, what was part of the curriculum? The Bible. Back then, Catholics did not read the Bible without their priests or their bishops. So, putting the King James Bible in the hands of a Catholic child, my goodness, that was a scandal. So they would take it for granted, you know? But back then, it was a scandal. So they said, our children are becoming Protestantized. What do we do? Well, bishop said, some bishops went to Europe, and they brought in sisters, and they began to establish Catholic schools. No? In the 1880s, all the bishops of the United States come together in what's called the Third Plenary Council of Baltimore. And there, you know, I always say that the bishops made one of the wildest decisions in the history of this country. Amazing, amazing. Some claim that it's the Holy Spirit. Could have been the wine, could have been something in the air. But I don't care. It was the most amazing response. They came out of this saying every Catholic parish in the United States must build a Catholic school. What do you think that if Bishop Calvo went to your parishes and said that? What would happen? We build it. You think you'll build it? Good. So we got, what's your parish, Bishop? Like, no, please. We'll build it. Okay, so you got the people who would say, yes, we'll build it. Yes, we'll build it. And then, what else would happen? Well, some people would say, no, hey, there would be a riot, you know? Some people would dismiss this. And that's what happened. Some pastors, some leaders said, we're not going to do it, we don't have the money. But there were people who said, let's give it a try. And many parishes, thousands of parishes, gave it a try. You know how many Catholic schools we ended up building in the United States between the middle of the 19th century and the middle of the 20th century, 13,000 Catholic schools plus. More than 13,000 Catholic schools. Who built those Catholic schools? Immigrants. For their children. With the help of the community. They were convinced that this was important. Okay? What did Catholic schools were built for two reasons. One, to give the best education to Catholic children. And two, to provide a space where children will grow in their faith. So they will be Catholic. By the 1950s, 55% of all Catholic children in the United States, vast majority white, Euro-American, were enrolled in Catholic schools. 55%, more than half. What did that do? This is what I call the third unintended consequence of Catholic education. Catholic education, by Catholic schools, by providing this quality education, helped children to integrate better into the society and then move on to college, and become professionals. By the middle of the 20th century, 1960s, 50s and 60s, Catholics in the United States, as a bloc, let me rephrase this, white Euro-American Catholics, as a bloc in the United States, transitioned from being an Indian community, mostly neighborhood ghettoish community, into the middle class in the United States. 55% of white Catholics in this country are college educated. Adult Catholics are college educated. The most educated group in the United States is Jews. The second most educated group in the United States is white Catholics. Okay? The third best educated group is Asians. Just to give you a sense, so you can put this in perspective. Okay? Now, when you become part of the middle class, you become a professional. Thousands of these Catholics became millionaires, highly successful, and they joined every area of the life of the church and society. They became business people, politicians, professors, they became intellectuals, they became writers, they became leaders, name it. You know, even a president we had, J.F. Kennedy. No? So we had all this. It was amazing. Now that you have some more money in your pocket, no? And for a lot of these Catholics, it was a lot of money. What would you do with all that money? What was that? You would build more schools. You know? Okay, you invest in schools. What else would you do? If you had a lot of money, or with the money that nowadays Catholics have?
Hire teachers.
You hire teachers. What else? Well, you start building infrastructure when you get more resources. Parish centers, like this one, you know, with air conditioning. Does it have air conditioning? Okay, I'm feeling hot, so I just... with air conditioning, okay? You start building more beautiful rectories. You start building, you know, universities. You start building, well, you got more cash in your pocket. What else would you do? Well, the sister said, what about if we build hospitals? And Catholics build hospitals. What about orphanages? Well, let's build orphanages. Let's build pastoral centers. And Catholics build all this stuff. It's amazing. And not only that, I mean, at some point the Catholics said, well, we are kind of doing well here. What about if we start sending money somewhere else, helping the poor in the world? And then the Conference of Bishops now creates what's called CRS, Catholic Relief Services. Catholic Relief Services is an agency that provides resources to those parts of the world where there is a lot of need, you know, especially when there are disasters, you know. So where there is hunger. Has anybody here ever contributed to CRS? Excellent, wonderful. keep doing that, okay? And we need to educate the Indian community also to start supporting that because it's very important. So we all see the benefits. So in a sense, if we could stop right now, 1960s, let's stop the clock, hold hands, and sing Kumbaya, Lord, Kumbaya. We did it, you know? That's what I learned, you know, my son and my daughter watched Dora the Explorer, so she says, we did it, you know? And that's what happens. Yes, as Catholics, we made it in the United States of America. We reached the American dream. We were successful, we established ourselves, became middle class. We are able to provide a better future to our children. Are you with me?
Yes.
Excellent. Don't you think that that's enough reason to celebrate? That's amazing. That's just great. Let me look at my clock and see how much time I have. 10:18. We're supposed to stop at what time? At 11? No. At 11. Okay, so we have enough time. Well, so if we were singing Kumbaya, we were stopping. The Euro-American church is, Catholicism is 90%, and at this moment it's 92% white, Euro-American. Most Catholics are becoming middle class. Not all Catholics became middle class. Unfortunately, Catholics in the Midwest, mountain states, and the rural areas never made it. They never made it. That was very unfortunate, no? Some parts of Nevada, some parts of Texas never made it. Catholics never moved into the middle class. And they continue to struggle today, white Catholics. So, but overall the church, this is a triumphant church, as many people say. Triumphant church, we did very well. And not only that, we had sisters, oh my goodness, there were sisters all over the place. We didn't have to bring sisters from Europe anymore. No more sisters from Europe. Now we produce our own sisters. Our daughters want to be sisters. Our sons want to be priests. There were so many priests in the United States of America, especially in the Northeast and the Midwest, that we didn't know what to do with them. Imagine, Bishop, that would be ideal today, isn't it? But we didn't know what to do. So you had parishes with 7 priests. So one was the pastor, of course, who kind of ran the show, the parish. And then he had 2 parochial vicars who celebrated Mass, here and there. And then you had 4 floating priests. Like, what do we do with these priests? So they said, well, what about you want to you want to run to the hospital? That's going to be your ministry. Okay, full-time hospital ministry. What do we do with the other 3? School. You want to teach? Go and teach at school. Now we're down to 2. What do we do with those 2? You want to be the basketball coach? Sure. I'm not kidding. That's the church in the Northeast Midwest. It was an abundance, an overabundance. Sisters. There were so many sisters that they spent their life doing ministry, missionary work. We even exported priests and sisters to Latin America, to Africa, to Europe, everywhere, These were the heydays of Catholicism. Kumbaya, my Lord, kumbaya, amen. I always say, if we could have stopped the clock there, history, we will be doing so well. But in the middle of so much energy, in so much building up, there were 2 main groups, or 3 groups, that Euro-American Catholics did not pay much attention to, okay? Frankly, many did not even care much about these 3 groups, for many reasons, Some reasons were cultural, some of those reasons were racism, biases, some of those reasons were political, but Native Americans who were Catholic, Black Catholics, and Hispanic Catholics were not in the picture, okay? Most Catholic schools, the vast majority, 98-99% of Catholic schools in this country did not welcome Black children, did not welcome Hispanic children. That was a fact, We're not going to judge them because we all are children of our times. We're all children of our times. So Hispanic children are not benefiting from this. Black children who are Catholic are not benefiting from this. Native American children are not benefiting from this. And the Asian Catholic population is very small and still not benefiting from this. Okay? So, if we have stopped history in the 1950s or 60s,